The morning they set me up as a joke, I didn't laugh. Not because I was angry. Not right away. But because when I walked into that diner and saw her sitting alone in the corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes fixed on something out the window that none of the rest of us could see, I felt something shift. Something quiet. The way a level bubble finds its center after you've been holding it crooked for too long. I didn't know she was deaf yet. I didn't know my coworkers had spent 3 weeks engineering this particular humiliation. I didn't know that the woman in the corner booth was about to become the most important person in my life. I just knew she was the most still person I'd ever seen in a crowded room. And I'd spent enough years being the loudest kind of quiet, the kind where you talk plenty but say nothing, to recognize real stillness when it sat down across from you. The guys had been laughing about it all week. I caught pieces of it. Whispers behind the truck bed. Somebody's phone lighting up in the brake shack, somebody else snorting into their coffee. I thought they were talking about the Hendricks job, about the framing we'd botched on the east wall. I didn't put it together until I was already standing at the table. She looked up at me then. Dark eyes. Not startled. Just watching. Patient in a way that made me feel like I was the one who'd arrived late to something important. And later, much, much later, when she finally said those words out loud to me in her particular way, her voice low and measured and beautiful, I understood exactly what she meant. My coworkers set me up with a deaf woman as a joke, until you made me smile and silenced them all. She laughed when she said it. A real laugh. The kind that starts in the chest. I didn't say a word. I just stood there thinking, the joke was always on them. My name is Cal Pruitt. I was 34 years old that spring, living in Harlan's Crossing, Tennessee, a town of about 4,000 people that sat in the crook of two hills like something God had set down and forgotten to pick back up. One Main Street. A diner called Patsy's. A hardware store that smelled like linseed oil and old receipts. A volunteer fire department with a busted sign out front that nobody had gotten around to fixing for 2 years. I was a carpenter. Had been since I was 19, when I followed my Uncle Dale onto a framing crew and discovered that building things was the one language I spoke without stumbling. I worked for Brennan Brothers Construction, Mick and Terrell Brennan, who were neither brothers nor named Brennan, but that's a different story. We did residential framing, custom cabinetry, renovation work. Deck builds in summer. Interior trim in winter. The kind of steady, unglamorous work that keeps a small town standing. I drove a 2009 Chevy Silverado with 211,000 miles on it and a crack in the dashboard that let in a cold whistle every time I hit highway speed. I rented a garage apartment behind old Wanda Stiles's property on Cutter Road, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a bathroom with a showerhead that listed to the left. I'd fixed everything in that apartment except the showerhead. That one I left crooked on purpose. I didn't examine why. I had a scar on my left forearm from a table saw incident in 2019, a ragged line about 4 inches long that had gone pale and silver. It didn't hurt anymore. It had stopped hurting a long time ago. The doctors said I was lucky. I said I was careful. We were both wrong. The deficit that spring was simpler than a scar. It was just loneliness, the particular kind that settles in after a long time of being fine. I dated some. Nothing had stuck. My mother called every Sunday and asked the same question in slightly different clothes, and I gave her the same answer in slightly different words. I wasn't bitter about it. I wasn't even especially sad. I was just running slightly crooked. like the showerhead. And the ticking clock that gave everything urgency. I had exactly 3 weeks until Mick Brennan decided whether to keep the crew together or break it up. The Harlan County Development's contract, a 12-house residential build on the north side of town, was hanging on whether we came in under budget on the Kellerman renovation. I was the lead carpenter. I needed to be focused. I needed to keep my head down. Instead, I walked into Patsy's Diner on a Tuesday morning in April, and everything changed. The guys had picked a Tuesday because they knew I went to Patsy's on Tuesdays. I had for 6 years. Corner stool at the counter, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. It was the one ritual I kept without variation, and they knew it. What I didn't know was that they'd called ahead. That they'd talked to Patsy herself, a woman with no particular loyalty to my feelings, and arranged for a specific booth to be held. That they'd told her they were setting up a friend on a date, which was true, and that the woman coming in had a hearing disability, which was also true, and that the whole crew would be eating breakfast at the foretop near the door so they could watch, which was the part Patsy probably should have questioned. I came in at 7:15 like always. The bell above the door jangled. I saw the guys immediately, Terrell and Dave Kowalski, and young Brendan Marsh, who'd only been with us 8 months and should have known better than to let the older ones pull him in. They were already in the booth near the door, already laughing at something, and when they saw me the laughing got louder and Dave made a gesture with his coffee cup that I didn't understand. I looked where he was gesturing. Corner booth. A woman sitting alone. She was maybe 30. Dark hair, cut short on one side, longer on the other, a style I'd never seen on anyone in Harlan's Crossing before. She wore a green jacket over a flannel shirt, and her hands around the coffee mug were the hands of someone who worked with them, short nails, a small callus along the right index finger. She was looking out the window at the hardware store across the street, and there was something in her expression that I can only describe as deliberate. Like she'd chosen that particular view and committed to it. On the table in front of her, face up, there was a small notepad. A pen beside it. Patsy materialized at my elbow. She was 62, efficient, and had no patience for hesitation. Your booth's taken, hon, I put you at that corner table. A pause, something complicated in her expression. Your friend set something up. Go say hello. I turned back toward the guys. Terrell was grinning in a way I didn't like. He caught my look and made a two-handed shrug that said, "What are you gonna do?" I understood then that something was happening that I hadn't agreed to. And I had 2 choices. I could sit at the counter and make it into nothing, which was the sensible choice. Or I could walk over to that corner booth and be a decent human being to someone who'd apparently been deposited here without her full consent either. I walked to the corner booth. She heard the footsteps, maybe, or felt them, or simply noticed movement in her peripheral vision. She turned from the window to look at me. Direct. Unhurried. A slight crease at the corner of her mouth that was waiting to decide whether to become something. I stood there for a second, which was probably too long. I didn't know the right protocol. I didn't know if I should speak. I didn't know anything except that she was looking at me with a patience that felt earned, and the least I could do was match it. I slid into the booth across from her. She picked up the notepad and pen and pushed them across the table to me. I took that to mean, here's how we do this. I wrote. Asterisk, my name is Cal. I think my coworkers did something they shouldn't have, asterisk, she read it. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite the smile yet, but a first cousin to it. She took the notepad back. My name is Nora. I think yours and mine have the same bad ideas. I looked up. She was watching my face while I read, which I come to understand later was how she read a room, not just the words, but the face behind the words. I wrote, "Did they tell you anything about this?" My sister. She works at the county assessor's office. Your guy Terrell apparently charmed her into it. I looked over at the table by the door. Terrell was no longer grinning. He was watching now, and something in his expression had shifted, less amusement, more uncertainty, as if the joke was running a direction he hadn't fully mapped. I looked back at Nora. "I'm sorry," I wrote. "You don't have to stay." She took the notepad. "Read it." And then she did something I wasn't expecting. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind you deploy to smooth over awkwardness. A real one, quick and bright, and she put her hand over her mouth when it happened, like she was mildly surprised by it herself. Then she composed herself and wrote back. I already ordered the French toast. I'm not going anywhere, and then she looked at me again, that same patient, deliberate look, and I understood that she'd weighed the situation and arrived at her own conclusion, independent of anyone's intentions, and that conclusion was, I will give this 1 hour and French toast. I flagged down Patsy and ordered my eggs. The guys by the door were very quiet. We were at that table for 2.5 hours. I called into work late for the first time in 3 years. Mick left me a voicemail that was 11 seconds long and contained exactly 1 question mark's worth of confusion. I listened to it in the parking lot afterward and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was, that was worth it. Here's what I learned about Nora Castillo in that first conversation, conducted entirely in pen and notepad, with occasional pointing and 1 instance of me miming the sound of a table saw badly enough to make her laugh again. She was 31. She'd grown up in Nashville but moved to Harlan's Crossing 14 months ago after her mother's first stroke. Her mother, Elaine, lived on Prospect Hill Road in a house that needed work, a lot of work. The kind that accumulated when a woman lived alone for 20 years and didn't call her son-in-law for help because she didn't have one. Nora had taken a job at the county library, cataloging and ordering and generally making herself useful in the way that people with very organized minds make themselves useful. She'd been deaf since she was 7. Bacterial meningitis. She had moderate speech, could speak clearly when she chose not to in new situations because people's faces got strange when they heard her voice and she was tired of managing their faces. She read lips well when people faced her and didn't rush. She used ASL with her family and close friends. She had none of those here yet. She wrote that last part without looking up from the notepad. And when she did look up, her face was composed, presenting nothing. But I thought, I'm not sure why I thought this, that it was a costly kind of composure. The kind you maintain because the alternative is too expensive. I wrote, I'd like to learn. If that's not a strange thing to say, she read it. Tilted her head. It's a little strange. Why, I thought about it. I wrote, because it seems like everyone here talks at you and not with you, and that seems like an inefficient system. She stared at that for a long moment. Then she turned the notepad over to the blank back cover and drew a small, neat diagram of 2 people at a table. Arrows going both directions between them. She tapped it. That, she wrote underneath it, is the first accurate thing anyone in this town has said to me. I looked over at the table by the door. The guys were gone. They cleared out somewhere in the second hour. Their booth was empty. Patsy was wiping it down, and she caught my eye across the diner and gave me a look I couldn't entirely decode, something between vindication and something gentler. I wrote my phone number on the notepad. Below it I wrote, asterisk if you ever need a carpenter. I hear your mother's house needs work, asterisk. Nora read it. She wrote below my number, without hesitation, asterisk she does. The porch railing is so loose I'm afraid to lean on it. If I fall through, my sister will never let me hear the end of it, asterisk. She looked up when I finished reading, and her mouth made a shape that acknowledged the joke, gentle and self-aware. There it was, the full smile, finally. Small, precise. Loaded with something. I didn't say anything, because I was still learning the language. But I thought, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Outside the window, the hardware store's old sign caught the morning light. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I drove to the Kellerman renovation 35 minutes late and worked through lunch. She texted me 4 days later. Not a call, of course not a call. A text, careful and deliberate, the way everything about Nora was deliberate. Asterisk the railing tried to kill me this morning. Mom said to ask if you're still interested, asterisk. I was on my lunch break, eating a sandwich on the tailgate of the Silverado. I wrote back, when do you want me to come by? Saturday. The Kellerman job was going well enough by then that I'd relaxed a little. We'd found our rhythm, me on the cabinetry, Dave on the electrical rough-in, Brendan learning to frame at a pace that was at least not dangerous. Mick had come by Thursday and stood in the kitchen doorway with his coffee and made a noise that wasn't quite approval but was in its neighborhood. I took that as a good sign. The guys hadn't said much about Patsy's. Not directly. Terrell had asked, with very elaborate casualness, how Tuesday went, and I'd said fine, and he'd nodded too many times and gone back to his framing square. Brendan had asked if I'd gotten her number, and I'd said yes, and he'd gone so red I'd had to look away to spare him. Dave hadn't said anything at all, which from Dave was a form of apology. I didn't tell them about Saturday. It wasn't their business anymore. Elaine Castillo's house on Prospect Hill Road was a 1962 ranch with a covered front porch and 30 years of deferred maintenance wearing it like a comfortable old coat. The porch railing was original wood, a beautiful hand-cut balustrade that someone had known what they were doing building, once upon a time, now thoroughly rotted through at the base posts. 2 of the porch boards themselves had soft spots. The front steps had separated from the frame. I stood on the porch with my coffee. Nora had met me at the door with it, which I took as a good sign, and assessed the damage while she stood beside me, and I wrote notes on my yellow pad, and she read them as I wrote and occasionally pointed out something I'd missed, like the way the gutter had been pulling away from the fascia board and letting water run behind the soffit for what looked like years. How long has this been going? I wrote. Asterisk since before Mom's stroke. She didn't like to bother anyone, asterisk. I looked at the gutter. I looked at the fascia. I made a mental list that was longer than Saturday. Inside, Elaine Castillo was in the kitchen making more coffee she didn't need after the pot she'd already made. She was 63, small, moving with the careful, deliberate steps of a woman relearning how to trust her own body. Her left arm was weaker. She spoke clearly enough, and she looked at her daughter with an expression I recognized, the particular tenderness of a mother watching her child navigate something hard and doing it better than she'd feared. She likes you. Nora wrote to me on the notepad when we were back on the porch. She called you practical looking, which from her is a very high compliment. I wrote back, I'll take it. We stayed on the porch for a while, she and I, after I'd assessed the work. She sat on the old porch swing at the far end, the one section of railing that wasn't compromised, and I sat on the step, and we passed the notepad back and forth in the late morning light, and the conversation moved the way good conversations move, not in a straight line, but sideways and back and forward, circling around things and then landing on them. She told me about sign language, what it felt like to think in it, visual and spatial, she said, not sequential like spoken English. Like the difference between a map and a list. I told her about reading blueprints, how once you learned to see a building as a flat drawing you could never unsee it. Everywhere you went you were also seeing the bones of things. She thought about that and wrote, asterisk, that's it. That's exactly it, asterisk, and then she looked up at me the way she'd looked up at me in the diner, and I held the look instead of glancing away this time. I started on the porch railing the following Saturday. I started learning ASL the Tuesday after that. I want to be clear about something. I did not decide to learn sign language as a gesture. I am not a gesture kind of person. I am a systems kind of person. If there's a tool for a job, you learn the tool. Nora was not a project I was trying to win. She was a person I wanted to talk to, and the notebook was slow, and I am impatient in the way that patient people sometimes are, not with others, but with inefficiency. So I looked it up. I found a free course online that Gallaudet University put together, which was good and thorough and made my hands feel stupid in ways I hadn't felt since the first time I tried to use a biscuit joiner. I practiced in the evenings in my garage apartment, alone, watching the instructor's hands and trying to make mine do the same. I was bad at it. I was bad at it for 3 weeks. The complication arrived in week 2. His name was Fletcher Grady. He was 38, worked in commercial real estate, drove a vehicle that cost more than my truck times 3. He'd gone to Vanderbilt. He had the kind of jaw that looked carved rather than grown. He was, I would later learn, an ex-boyfriend of Nora's from Nashville. They dated for almost 2 years before she moved to Harlan's Crossing, and the relationship had ended in a way she described, tersely, as, asterisk, he had a very clear vision of who he thought I was. I was not that person, asterisk. He came into Harlan's Crossing on a Tuesday. He came into the county library on a Wednesday. He found Nora at her cataloging station in the back, and by the account of her coworker Linda, who told Nora's sister, who told Nora, who told me, he was charming about it in the way that people who are very used to being charming are charming, smoothly, and with absolute confidence in the outcome. Nora told me about it that Saturday on the porch. I was resetting the base posts for the new railing, pressure-treated 4x4s, properly mortared this time, nothing going soft for another 20 years, and she was sitting on the step with the notepad, handing me screws when I needed them. She wrote, Fletcher came to the library, I kept working. What did he want? Asterisk, he says he wants to talk. He says he made a mistake, asterisk, I said a screw. I didn't look up. What do you think? She didn't write back right away. I could see her in my peripheral vision, her hands in her lap, looking at something down the street. Then, asterisk, I think he's decided he misses me now that I'm not convenient. That's different from actually missing me, asterisk, I looked up then. She was already watching my face. I wrote, that's a clear-eyed thing to say. I've had a lot of practice. I went back to the posts. We worked in that quiet for a while, or she sat and I worked, which was its own kind of working together. After a few minutes she wrote, asterisk, he's going to come back. He doesn't give up easily, asterisk, neither do you, I wrote. She read that. The corner of her mouth moved. No, she wrote. I don't. The railing took 2 Saturdays to finish. On the second Saturday, Elaine came out in the afternoon and stood in the front yard and looked at it, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said to nobody in particular, "That's the best this porch has looked since 1994. She didn't say it to me directly. She said it to the air, the way some people make announcements. But she looked at me when she said it, which was enough. Nora was standing beside her mother. She saw my face when Elaine spoke. She pointed at her mother and then at me, and made a gesture I didn't know yet, and I looked helpless, and she pulled out the notepad and wrote, *, she's telling you thank you. In her language, which is being very quiet about how much something means, *, I looked at Elaine. I nodded. She patted my arm once, firmly, and went back inside. Nora and I stayed on the porch until the light went low. She didn't have the notepad anymore, we'd left it on the step. We were sitting on the porch swing now, which I'd also rehung with new hardware, and the evening was coming in slow over the hill, and the porch light came on automatically when the dusk got deep enough. An old fixture, amber-toned. Warm. I looked at it. I thought about my garage apartment, about the way I'd started leaving my own porch light on when I went out at night, not out of habit but out of something I hadn't quite named yet. The feeling that there was now a reason to come home to a lit place. Nora followed my gaze to the light. She looked at it a moment, then looked at me. She made a sign I didn't know, one hand flat, the other curled, the flat hand passing over the curled one, a kind of sheltering gesture. I looked at her, helpless again. She spelled it out on her palm with her finger, WAITING. I nodded slowly. She held the gesture. 3 weeks into learning ASL, I signed 3 words to her. We were in Patsy's again. It had become our Tuesday place again, unofficially and without discussion. She came in at 7:15 now. I was already there. Patsy had stopped pretending she was surprised. Nora slid into the booth. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there last week. I found out later that Elaine had had a difficult night, some dizziness and confusion, and Nora had been up until 2. I waited until she'd had half her coffee. Then I put down my own mug and I signed, slowly and probably incorrectly, but with my hands in the right positions and my face holding the right expression because the ASL course had emphasized that expression was grammar, *, you look tired. I'm here, * 3 words. Or maybe 6 words with the face. I don't know how to count it. She went completely still. It was a different kind of still from the one I'd noticed that first morning. This one wasn't composure. This one was something breaking open and then very carefully, very quietly, being held together. She looked at my hands. She looked at my face. And then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She held it there. 1 moment. 2. She didn't write anything. She didn't need to. Patsy appeared with the French toast and very wisely said nothing. Fletcher Grady came back on a Thursday. I was working on Elaine's gutters that day. I'd taken a half day because the Kellerman job was ahead of schedule and Mick had told me, with his usual excess of words, to take it easy, and I was up on the ladder when a silver SUV I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the house. He got out in a way that people who know they're being watched get out of cars. He was wearing clothes that were too clean for this part of Tennessee in April. He looked up at me on the ladder without evident surprise, like a man who'd cataloged obstacles before breakfast. "You the carpenter?" he said. "I am," I said. "Nora home?" "Don't know," I said. Which was true, she'd been at the library until 4. He looked at the porch. He looked at the new railing, the reset steps, the patched boards. He looked at the gutter I was currently cleaning out. He turned something over in his expression that I wasn't supposed to see, but I was up on a ladder with a long sight line and I saw it anyway. Calculation. The recognition that someone had been spending time here. Nice work, he said, neutral. Thanks, I said, neutral back. He waited a moment, then got back in the SUV. He didn't leave, he parked down the block. I could see him in the driver's seat from the ladder. He was on his phone. I finished the gutters. I climbed down. I cleaned my tools. Nora got home at 4:15. She saw the SUV. I was on the porch, collecting my gear, and I watched her face when she recognized it, a rapid sequence of things that settled into resolution, the way a building settles onto its foundation. Not afraid. Not even angry. Just choosing how to handle this. She looked up at me. She signed. Did he say anything? My hands were slower than her eye. Asterisk just asked if you were home. He's been waiting. Asterisk she nodded once. She set her bag on the porch step. She walked down to the SUV. I didn't watch. I packed my tools in the truck. I heard the SUV door open and close. Heard nothing, because there was nothing to hear. I've learned, since, that silence can be the most dignified thing in a situation. 40 minutes later I was still sitting in my truck in the driveway because I wasn't sure whether to leave, and the SUV drove past without stopping. I watched it go. Nora came back up the driveway. She sat down on the new porch steps, testing them, maybe, or just sitting. I got out of the truck and sat beside her. She said, in her voice, the first time I'd heard her speak at anything more than a murmur, he asked me to come back to Nashville. Her voice was low and deliberate, its own particular rhythm. He said he's been working on himself. I didn't say anything. He had a lot of words, she said. Very well organized words. I thought about that. Then I said, carefully, you deserve more than well-organized words. She looked at me directly. She studied my face the way she always studied faces, reading the grammar of it. What do you think I deserve? She said. I thought about the gutters. The railing. The mornings at Patsy's. The hand over mine. The porch light. The sign for waiting. I said, someone who shows up. She held my gaze. Something passed through her expression that I couldn't entirely name. Then she looked back at the porch. At the new railing, the reset steps. At the amber porch light coming on now in the early dusk. She didn't say anything. But she didn't leave either. The night everything came to a head began with a misunderstanding. Which is how most things come to a head, I've found. It was a Friday evening, the 3rd week of May. The Kellerman job was done. Mick had shaken my hand, literally, which for Mick meant more than a speech, and confirmed we'd gotten the Harlan County Development's contract. The crew was going out to celebrate at Carver's Bar, which was the only bar in Harlan's Crossing and served 3 kinds of beer and 1 wine that tasted like a legal proceeding. I'd said I might come by later. I was at Elaine's, finishing the last piece of work I'd taken on, a new set of kitchen cabinet doors, proper shaker style, measuring precisely to the old frames, hung with soft close hinges that Elaine had cooed over in a way that made Nora roll her eyes with great affection. I was fitting the last door when Nora came into the kitchen, and her face was a configuration I hadn't seen before. She handed me her phone. A text thread. From her sister, Marisol. The thread read, "In pieces, Nora, I need to tell you something. The guys at that construction crew have been telling everyone that the whole thing with Cal was a bet, that they put money on whether he could get a date with you after the diner thing. Dave apparently told Marisol's boyfriend at Carver's tonight." I stopped reading. I looked up. Nora was standing with her arms crossed, not in anger, in the particular posture of someone who is deciding how much something has hurt them before they figure out what to do about it. I put the phone down on the counter. I said her name. She watched my mouth. I said, slowly and clearly, "That is not what happened. I had no part in any bet. What happened at that diner was something your sister and Terrell set up without asking either of us. I was as surprised as you were." I held her gaze. "You can verify that with Patsy." She watched my face. She held the crossed arms. Then she signed something at me, fast, faster than I could follow, and realized it and slowed down and signed. "Why didn't you tell me about the setup? I thought about that." I said, "Because it stopped matching about 3 minutes in. And I didn't think you'd want to spend more time on it." "You could have told me." "You're right," I said. "I should have." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She texted something quickly. She set it down. She picked up the notepad, old habit, familiar ground, and wrote, "Fletcher texted me today. He said a man he knows saw us at Patsy's and told him I was being strung along for a bet. I thought he was lying to manipulate me, **. She turned the notepad toward me. I read it. I set it down. "He wasn't lying about what he heard," I said. "He just didn't know the full story. Which is that I was set up to meet you as a joke by my coworkers. I sat down because you were a person worth sitting down with, and I've spent the last month repairing your mother's porch because I am a carpenter and I care about what's built right." She watched every word. "The bet, if there was a bet, was their business," I said. "Not mine. I never agreed to it. I never knew about it. And if you want to walk out that door and never see me again, that's your right, and I'll finish the cabinets and go home. But I need you to know that what I've said to you and what I've done here has been mine. All of it." Nora looked at the new cabinet doors. She looked at the notepad. She looked out the kitchen window at the porch, the new railing showing white in the evening light, the porch lamp burning amber. She was still for a very long time. Then she turned to me. She signed slowly, making sure I would follow. "You've been learning my language," I nodded. "Nobody ever did that for me before," I signed back, clumsily, my hands still uncertain but my face holding the weight of what I meant. "I'm not done learning." Her eyes were bright. Not crying, or not quite. Something at the edge of it. She said, in her voice, firm, certain, no hesitation, "I want to tell you something." I waited. "My coworkers set me up with a deaf woman as a joke," she said, and there was something in how she said it, deliberate, precise, owning every word, "until you made me smile and silenced them all." She looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved. The full smile following, unhurried, certain of itself. "You silenced them," she said. "Not with noise. You just showed up. And kept showing up. And they have nothing to say anymore. I didn't have a speech for that. I'm a carpenter. I know what something looks like when it's built right." I said, "I'm going to keep showing up." She nodded once, slow, like a decision being made concrete. "Good," she said. Then she looked at the last cabinet door, still resting against the counter, waiting to be hung. Finish the door, she signed. I finished the door. What happened next took the better part of 2 weeks, and happened mostly in small pieces, the way things that matter usually happen. I went to Carver's that Friday night. I found Terrell and Dave and Brendan at the back table, in various states of celebration and embarrassment. I sat down. I told Terrell that I needed him to tell me, straight, what the actual arrangement had been. He told me. He'd made a $50 side bet with Dave that I'd fumble it in under 10 minutes. It was stupid. He knew it was stupid. He'd been trying to decide how to apologize for 2 weeks. He said, I didn't expect you to actually, and then he stopped, because he didn't have a clean way to finish that sentence. To actually what? I said. He looked at his beer. To be good at it. I thought about what Nora had said. About showing up. About noise versus presence. I'm going to need you to leave her alone, I said. All of you. She's not a setup. Terrell nodded. He dug in his pocket and put $50 on the table. He pushed it toward me. That's not mine, I said. I know, he said. Give it to her. I left it on the table. The following Tuesday, I came into Patsy's and Nora was already in the booth, our booth, and she'd brought 2 notebooks instead of 1. She slid one across to me with a pen already uncapped. On the front she'd written in her clean, precise hand, for the record, I looked up. She signed, I want to keep what we say. I think it's worth keeping, I thought about that. I thought about all the scraps of yellow notepad, all the texts, all the slow, building signs passing between my clumsy hands and her patient eyes. I wrote in the notebook, I think so too, she smiled again. That same smile, small, precise, loaded. We ordered breakfast. The work on Elaine's house continued through the spring. After the porch and the gutters and the cabinets, there was the back door that didn't seal, and the window in the second bedroom that had been painted shut, and the attic hatch that Elaine had been avoiding since 2018 because she was afraid of what was up there. Mostly boxes. Some old furniture. A rocking horse that had been Nora's when she was small, which Nora held for a long moment when she found it and then set back down very carefully, like something that still contained something. Elaine's health stabilized in May. Her neurologist, a woman in Knoxville who spoke plainly and didn't hedge, said the indicators were better than expected. She'd started physical therapy twice a week. She was relearning to cook with her left hand having a reduced role, and she was adapting with the same deliberate stubbornness her daughter had, which helped me understand where Nora had gotten it. Fletcher Grady did not come back. He sent one more text, to Nora's sister, not to Nora, that Marisol described as gracious in a way that was clearly practice. Nora's response was to block the number. Not with anger. Just with clarity. My ASL improved. By the end of May I could carry a basic conversation, not fast, not fluid, but honest. Nora was a patient teacher and a difficult one, which was the best combination. She didn't let me get away with approximations. If my hand shape was wrong, she'd take my hand and reposition it without comment, which was both instructive and one of the better things that had happened to me in years. The crew found out, eventually, that I was learning ASL. Brendan thought it was cool in an uncomplicated way that I appreciated. Dave said nothing, as Dave did, but he started using his hands differently, more expressive, less shut down. Terrell said, one morning over the tailgate, you know, that's the kind of thing a man does when he's serious. I said nothing. He said, good, and went back to work. Mick gave me the lead on the first house in the Harlan County Development's contract. 2 weeks later, he offered me the lead on all 12. I was making enough, for the first time in years, to think beyond the month I was in. One evening in early June, I was finishing up on Elaine's back door and Nora was in the kitchen, and Elaine came in from her physical therapy and sat at the kitchen table and looked at us both moving around the kitchen. Nora checking something in the notebook, me fitting the new door seal, and she said, to no one in particular, "This is what I prayed for." Nora was watching her mother's face. She saw what she'd said. She looked at me. I looked at her. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. I asked Nora to sit on the porch with me that evening. The railing was solid now. I'd set every post properly, mortared the bases, fitted the balusters with a precision that still satisfied me when I looked at it. The boards were firm underfoot. The steps were square and true. The porch light burned amber in the early summer evening. We sat on the swing. She had the notebook. I had my hands. I signed, "I want to say something and I need you to give me a minute to get it right." She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. I thought about what I'd built here. Not the railing, not the cabinets, not the door seal. The thing underneath, the invisible structure. The showing up. The learning. The 2 notebooks filled with half a year of conversation. I signed, * when I sat down across from you in that diner, I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know if I was being set up or making a mistake or what was happening. I just knew you were worth sitting down with. I've felt that every Tuesday and every Saturday since. I don't want to stop showing up, * she watched every sign. When I finished, she was still, in that particular Nora way, thinking, not withdrawing. Then she picked up the notebook. She wrote carefully. She handed it to me. * I was so angry the morning Marisol called to tell me about the diner. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car for 15 minutes deciding. And then I thought, he didn't choose this situation either. The least I can do is give him 1 hour and French toast. I gave you 1 hour. You have somehow accumulated 6 months, *. She paused. She wrote again. * I have spent a lot of years learning not to need people to work that hard. Fletcher never worked hard. He just assumed I'd fit. You fit yourself to the shape of what I needed without making it into a performance. That is either very unusual or very specific to you. I think it's specific to you, *. She looked up. I signed, stay 1 sign. Present tense. Not a question, an offering. She looked at my hands. She looked at my face. She signed back. 2 signs, slow and clear, already here. The porch swing moved gently. Down the hill, Harlan's Crossing settled into its evening quiet. A dog barked somewhere. A screen door. The smell of somebody's supper. I reached over and took her hand. She let me. We sat there as the porch light held us in its small warm circle, and the evening came in, and it was enough. More than enough. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. 6 months later, on a Saturday in December, I stood on Elaine Castillo's porch and watched the first snow of the season come in sideways off the hill. The porch was solid. Every post, every board, every banister, solid. Elaine's kitchen cabinets closed with a soft, satisfying click that she'd commented on so often it had become its own kind of music. The attic hatch opened and closed properly now. The rocking horse had come back downstairs, repainted, set in the corner of the living room where Elaine could see it. I had moved out of my garage apartment on Cutter Road in October. I'd moved into a house, not this one, mine, 3 blocks over, a 1950s bungalow I'd bought with the first real money I'd made on the Harlan County Development's job. It had a porch, too. I'd already started fixing it. I heard the front door open behind me. Footsteps. Then Nora's hand on my shoulder, then her standing beside me, looking out at the snow. We stood there a moment. She signed into my peripheral vision, "Marisol wants to know if we're coming for dinner." I signed back, "We're coming." She smiled. She turned to go back in. I stopped her, a hand on her arm, light. She turned. I signed, "I want to tell you something." She waited. "I left a note at the diner." I signed. *for Patsy. I told her that the setup worked, just not the way anyone expected. I thought she deserved to know. Nora tilted her head. She made the face she made when she was deciding whether to be amused. Then she made the face she made when she decided yes. She signed. "What did she say?" She said, "I know. I've been watching it happen since April." Nora laughed. That same laugh, quick and bright, with the hand coming up to her mouth and the mildly surprised quality of it, as if laughter still caught her off guard after all these months, as if she still wasn't quite used to it being regular. I thought, I will spend the rest of my life trying to produce that sound. We went in for dinner. Inside, the house was warm. Elaine had the radio on, an old habit, maybe, or maybe new, and it played something low and brass and undemanding. Marisol had brought her boyfriend, who'd had the good sense to look slightly ashamed around me for exactly one visit before I told him to let it go. He'd let it go. There was food on every surface, the kind of meal that has opinions about how cold it is outside. After dinner, while the others were in the kitchen, Nora sat beside me on the old living room couch and put something in my hand. A small piece of paper, folded once. I opened it. Her handwriting. The notebook one. There is a specific kind of quiet that is not absence. You made me feel that. I want to keep feeling it. I held the paper. She was watching my face. I signed, deliberately, taking my time. "Me too." She nodded. Once, slow. The decision made kind. Outside, through the living room window, I could see the porch. The amber light was on, had been on since dusk, automatic, faithful. It held its small circle in the snow, warm against the cold, a lamp in the window. Waiting, it said. But also, arrived. I have thought about that Tuesday morning in April more times than I can count. The jangling bell. The corner booth. A woman looking out a window at something the rest of us couldn't see, still in the particular way that real stillness is, not empty, but full. Full of something she'd been carrying long enough that she'd made it part of her bearing. I sat down across from her and she handed me a notepad. My coworkers had engineered a humiliation. They'd expected awkwardness, embarrassment, a story to tell on Monday. They'd gotten silence instead, not because nothing happened, but because what happened had nothing to do with them. It outgrew their framework in about 10 minutes and kept growing. Maybe that's what love is, when it's real. Not a performance. Not a grand gesture you describe later. Just a framework that gets outgrown, and two people who decide to keep building anyway. Past the joke, past the noise, past all the well-organized words and the silver SUVs and the $50 bets. Just showing up. And finding, every time you do, that the other person is already there. The porch light holds. The snow comes down. Everything is still.